let's now get into our discussion. So, we've been talking about these 15 Sheilas, these positive behaviors and social qualities. And today we are doing number 4 because we did 3 and 5 at the same time. They're kind of similar. And today we are doing 4. So, number 1 was forgiveness, number 2 was magnanimity of mind. 3 was perpetual restraint on behavior and temper. 5 was all around self restraint. And 4, the one for today, is readiness to sacrifice everything of individual life for ideology. Okay? So, let's talk about that. And as I mentioned also on another occasion, that if you practice these qualities in regular life, then you gain more friends, you have more peace. These are really excellent codes of conduct to follow, just like the yamas and niyamas. Okay? All right. So, human beings are mental beings, right? We are not just physical beings, we're mental beings. We're not just mental beings and physical beings, we're also spiritual beings. But the biggest aspect of our life is the mind, is what we experience in our mind. So if you take an animal, for example, an animal is primarily physical. Yes, animals have a mind, and yes, animals have a sense of their own self, and to different extents, we believe human animals have that. So very similar to human beings, you know. But human beings have a little more of that, a little more of this sort of self-awareness, to the point where we have, you know, big egos and vanity, and we want our name written down in places. We want to accumulate physical things. So our sense of who we are and what we think is more important than physical life. Sometimes when we see somebody, we don't actually even see them physically. We see them with our mind. We judge them with our mind. We form stories about who they are with our mind, regardless of how they appear physically. So that means that so actually let's compare then the ideology of the two, animals and human beings. Animals are concerned with having enough food, procreation, survival, raising children. Those are some of the dominant qualities that we see in animals. Of course, there could be other qualities that I'm ignoring. And so then the ideology of an animal is pretty much, how can I get, you know, as much food as possible? How can I, you know, procreate and survive, especially animals in the wild, right? When we have domesticated animals who are fed, who form relationships with us, like dogs and cats, it's a little different. And in fact, those are neutered. Their lives are very altered. But that's sort of, we could say then, the ideology based on those animals' dharma, their natural qualities. But human beings are not just concerned with survival, with food. Even the poor who are, sometimes reduced to begging for their basic necessities. If those basic necessities are met, their mind quickly can shift towards something else, going beyond that. So, our ideology is based on our ideas. And your ideology should be a projection of your highest idea. And for us yogis, the highest idea that we can conceptualize is the mantra, the meaning of the mantra. The mantra means, for example, Bhavanam Kevalam, supreme consciousness is all there is. Other mantras, that personal mantras often mean I am that supreme consciousness. So this is the highest idea possible for a human being, transcending our humanity, expanding our humanity toward godliness. Just like when an animal also expands its animality toward humanness. In many ways, even those domesticated animals, the closer contact they have with human beings, their sense of self expands. Think of our pets and how they often behave like human beings. So, the ideology then is how to project the idea, how to establish the idea. And so ideology is very important for human beings because human beings live in their minds so much. Everything happens in the mind. And so then this concept, this Shila says that we should be ready to sacrifice for our ideology. Now, we have to remember, for example, one of the yamas and niyamas is tapa. Tapa means a willingness to sacrifice for service. So when I say to sacrifice for ideology, I not only mean the sacrifices you have to make to live your spiritual life, but the sacrifices that you have to make for others. Because if the ideology is that the supreme consciousness is all there is, then that means that you cannot neglect the living beings of this planet or the inanimate beings of this planet. Because everything is the supreme consciousness, whether it's animated or not. So, this microphone is the supreme consciousness. Because it exists within the mind of the supreme, because my ideology is that the supreme consciousness is all there is. So, when we look at that on a practical level, that not only has an individual expression, which means that I should aspire to see things in that way and treat things as such, but that's also reflected in a collective sense. It means then that we have to organize a society where in fact everybody is taken care of and all are allowed to be utilized to their maximum potential, or everybody's allowed to fulfill their maximum potentials, because collectively we believe that everybody is important. Everything is important because everybody and everything is the supreme. So then, not only should we sacrifice for our own spiritual growth, but we should sacrifice for the collective well being and identify if my individual ideology is that I am the supreme, because that's, the individual idea, then the collective idea is all is the supreme. And so then, as I work to organize myself toward my meditation, my practices, my diet, my relationships, my lifestyle, I can also work toward establishing that for the greater good. What policies can be put into place so that people can facilitate their individual spiritual life and their individual ideology. So then I'd like to talk a little bit more about collective ideology and the willingness to sacrifice for that. So I have a couple of stories here. Let's see. Well, first one is this is a little village in England, and I want to double check the name of the minister. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, yeah, his name was William Mompesson. Um, so this is the village of Eyam in England, and what happened here in the 1600s is that this village was in the middle of the bubonic plague, and there was a somebody from the village who acquired some clothes that came from London, where the bubonic plague was even more rampant. And so some articles of clothing came from London into Eyam, and this individual, opened up the sheets and and those artifacts of clothing, and then from there came the plague, the fleas. They were carrying the virus, and so that individual died. And it soon, ran through town that, oh, the plague has hit us. And people started dying. And soon after about a couple dozen people died, the members of the village decided that they need to get out. They need to leave because they need to save themselves. But there was one clergy person in the town named William Mompesson. And William Mompesson, there's even stories that he was not very well liked in the village. But he managed to convince the villagers to actually stay in the village, because he said, look, if we leave, we'll save ourselves, but we're going to carry the plague off to other villages. We need to quarantine ourselves. And we need to not only stay in the village, but we need to block anybody from coming into the village. And so that's what they did. And we're talking, the 1600s here, a time when we assume human beings are more primitive, less, and it's true. When you look back in history, human beings were even more brutal than they are today. But this village was able to do that, was able to sacrifice themselves. And in fact, around 235 of them died of the plague, from I think a total of 800 something that lived in the village. And thanks to them, it is believed that thousands of lives were saved. So those 235 sacrificed themselves for ideology, for the well-being of others. And it's remarkable. It's remarkable that we can see not just individual sacrifice, but collective sacrifice. And I want to show you another story of sacrifice. So this is a young man. Oh, he's actually, I think, 40. Mr. Sean King. He is a activist, and you may know him. He's a Black Lives Matter activist. He's a journalist. He's such an inspiring figure of our time today. And Sean King, what he does is he exposes police brutality. And his life is constantly threatened. He, writes about all the death threats that he receives that usually, he ignores, but actually he takes precautions because he's a father of 5. They take precautions, but he's gotten so many that by now he knows that they're not all. He knows which ones to take more seriously. But it was in the news this week that there was a Facebook group where former police officers were openly plotting to assassinate him. And he didn't know who to tell. He didn't know who to tell. Should I tell the police? Well, those are, actually police people in that police community who are making these threats. So maybe that's not the right place. He just decided to expose them and take screenshots of the group and expose all the people. Since then, those people writing those things in that group, they have deleted their Facebook accounts. So hopefully this has slowed down the plot to assassinate him. But the point is that he is a living example of somebody who is willing to sacrifice his own individual life for the collective welfare, so that police brutality, especially inflicted on the African American community, stop. So he's a wonderful example of an individual doing that. And I want to show you something else too. This week I posted this image here on Facebook. This wonderful quote. It says, "The greatest challenge of the human experience is discovering who you really are. The second greatest is living in a way that honors what you discovered." So it may have been a colossal, unimaginable challenge for you to arrive at this point in your spiritual existence, where you are now ready to become the Buddha, become the Christ, And so that was a great challenge, discovering who you really are, that you are the supreme consciousness. I mean, that's why you're here practicing this tantric meditation, because you know this. And hopefully you will realize this completely. But then the second challenge is so nicely elaborated here. Well, how can I live in a way that honors what I discovered? How can you live in a way that honors that all are the supreme? That second part is ideology. And ideology is just as important as the idea. It can even be, and it is so important. It is so important that we have to be willing to sacrifice even our life for ideology. Sacrifice, like these examples, the village of Iyam and people like Sean King, you know, those heroes, sheroes as well. And why? Why do we do that? Well, when you think about it, this life that we have, what we're clinging to in many ways, one of the biggest things we cling to is the body. But if we should die and physically cease to exist, we will just reincarnate into another body. So yogis have this kind of card up their sleeve that says that I know that if I die, it's okay. I'm just going to reincarnate into some other body. People who don't believe in reincarnation, well, naturally they will cling more to their life. But yet they also can be more free with their physical life because, I mean, say you're a Christian, you believe in heaven after death. Well, then what's the problem? If you lose this life, there's still life afterward that's enshrined in your beliefs. So we should not be so attached. And in fact, we should be willing to sacrifice. I'm not saying that this may even come to you. You may be fortunate enough that in your lifetime you will never have to sacrifice your life. But so good. But at the same time, just the willingness is a purification of the mind. And the willingness to sacrifice in general is a part and parcel of spiritual success. Because one of the yamas and niyamas is tapa, to sacrifice in the name of others, for service. So sacrifice has to be an aspect of our life. The ultimate sacrifice is to give our life for ideology. But every day we make small sacrifices, and we have to be willing to make all of the sacrifices so that we can attain our higher purpose.